Hello, welcome to another Asian Agribiz podcast. I'm Meliana, and today we have Professor Seth Naeve and Professor Bob Swick talking to Zahra Imtiaz on the importance of knowing your amino acid value when purchasing soybeans. This is often overlooked as Asian purchasers are accustomed to simply checking crude protein values. But listen to why we need to now move beyond crude protein values when formulating poultry diets.
Hi, Seth. Hi, Bob. Thank you for joining our podcast today. It's going to be a very interesting one on soybean purchasing and especially the Northern Soy Marketing Association that you guys are part of. Before we start off, can you give our audience a brief introduction of yourselves? Seth, why don't you go first?
Sure. I'm Seth Naeve, and I'm a professor in agronomy and plant genetics at the University of Minnesota. So I study soybeans. I study the production of soybeans, and I'm very interested in the composition of soybeans and how that affects the quality and the value of those soybeans.
Very interesting. Thank you. Bob, what about you?
Yeah, I'm Bob Swick. I'm adjunct professor at the University of New England and Poultry Hub Australia. That means I've retired from my academic duties, and I've got a lot of interest in sustainability and feeding the planet and the use of soybeans and soybean meal.
So you guys are the perfect people to talk to about this topic today. We are going to touch on the Northern Soy Marketing Board and especially the soybean that's grown in this region in the US, and also why it is so special for Asian buyers. Seth, can you give us a brief introduction on Northern Soy Marketing and what the specialty of the bean grown in these regions in the US?
Yeah, sure, of course. Northern Soy Marketing is a group of U.S. soybean producing states that are in the north and the west part of our soybean production area. This area is unique for a couple reasons. One is it's quite distant from the Gulf of Mexico and the eastern seaboard. And it's also quite distant from a lot of the big animal production within the U.S. So this area produces soybeans that tend to be shipped from the Pacific Northwest. So they go by rail. The soybeans and soybean meal are shipped by rail to the western U.S. and go out ports in Washington. And that makes it a very convenient location for exporting for markets in Asia. But overlapping with this is there's a very interesting phenomenon that the soybeans also have a slightly different composition in this area. They tend to be lower in protein, and therefore the soybeans have been somewhat discriminated against in the world market. So many markets have chosen not to buy soybeans from the Pacific Northwest because of lower protein level. But we think that there's additional value in these soybeans that are produced in the region. And so the farmers in these states have gone together and developed kind of a marketing group to help promote the utilization of soybeans that come from their states. So the states are Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, and Nebraska. So there are 5 states in this region.
Very interesting. I believe you spoke of the Pacific Northwest with my colleague Meliana in a previous podcast. So our audiences can tune into that later on, probably after this. So actually focusing more on what the Northern Soy Marketing or NSM does, we wanted to discuss a study that was recently conducted in Southeast Asia about the interesting views of buyers on what they find important when purchasing soybeans. But before we get into that survey, I would like to discuss one key factor there. You talk about a critical amino acid value metric. Can you explain to our listeners what this means? Bob, you can add if you wish.
Yeah, I'll start really briefly. And this was, part of this work was developed back when I was in graduate school. Actually, we we were trying to increase the protein level in soybean. And what we found was that there was, as we increased protein level in soybeans grown in one location, that we saw different proteins being deposited in the seed. And further look at this, we noticed that there was actually different levels of amino acids based on protein level. And it appeared to us that some amino acids were actually diluted out or diminished as proteins accumulated. They would accumulate higher levels of different proteins. So what we did was we started looking at this, and we were not nutritionists, so we just looked at some of the most limiting amino acids for animals by the literature, and we determined that lysine, cysteine, methionine, tryptophan, threonine were probably some of the most limiting amino acids that we had synthetic amino acids for. And so we developed a simple metric that looked at the relative abundance of those amino acids relative to the other amino acids. And so we noticed big, significant differences by production regions. So what it shows us is, as the soybean produces higher and higher concentrations of protein, it lays down different balances of different amino acids. So the soybean doesn't make more and more and more of the same protein. It makes different proteins as it gets higher and higher protein level. So there's somewhat of a quality versus quantity trade-off in soybean composition relative to protein and amino acids. And so it's something we noted, and we felt that it was important to the animal. And so that's why we've started working with nutritionists like Bob that understand animals, as a focus in their research, and I think they have a better handle on the relative value of those differences. So, Bob, maybe you can clarify some of my points relative to these amino acids.
And I think if you look at what NSM has published, the critical amino acid value is actually those 5 amino acids divided by the crude protein content. So that gives you a number, which is a simple number to just compare different soybean meals or soybeans. It's not completely that useful in formulating feed, however, but it just gives you a quick way of comparing different soybean meals.
So, Bob, just to add here, how important is this? I mean, you said that it is, does it actually change the composition of your formulation? I mean, does it make a big difference?
Well,
yeah.
Okay, well, these days, everybody should be formulating on digestible amino acids. And so the critical amino acid value is basically those 5 total amino acids. So it doesn't really have anything to do with digestibility per se. So I would say that the CAAV value, or the critical amino acid value, is only a good quick measure of comparing different soybean meals for, say, the buyer. For the formulating nutritionist, you need to have some idea of the digestible amino acid content of the meal that you're using. And the best way to do that is, or the best way to get that value is to go through NIR. And that's near infrared reflectance spectroscopy, where you put a sample and it in a box, and it in about a minute it will estimate all the digestible amino acids and even the metabolizable energy. So that's what you really need to use in your formulation.
So which decision for like buyers, where are they motivated by? Like, are they going to be like, okay, soybeans from NSM have this percentage of this kind of amino acid I might need, but it doesn't really matter for formulation? I mean, why should they be so, interested in looking at these the composition of amino acids in the first place?
Well, Yeah, if I could jump in real quick and just, talking back to the critical amino acid, I think the idea with the critical amino acid levels was just to promote the idea that there is differences among soybean meal and the sources of soybean meal. And I think buyers knew that their animals perform better or worse on various sources of meal, but they didn't maybe necessarily put it all together with specific nutrient compositional traits. And so, I think part of what the CAAV and this critical amino acid value was just to show that there are differences first, and then hand it off to someone like Bob that can help with formulations when they utilize these meal from these various sources.
Before that time, everybody would value the meal on a crude protein basis. And really, the chickens don't really care what the crude protein is. They care what is the content of digestible amino acids.
True. And that brings us to our next question. I think, Bob, you can start off here about the survey, which states that buyers still go for crude protein values rather than the availability of essential amino acids. So even after years of awareness programs and outreach, this view is very slow to change. Why is there such resistance?
Well, because it's very easy to measure the crude protein or nitrogen content of a sample and get a quick idea of what that number is. But these days, it's even easier to using the NIR machine to get the and we won't talk about availability, we'll talk about digestibility. You can get those digestible amino acid numbers very, very quickly, like a minute or 2 minutes. It only takes to get a good idea or an estimate of those digestible amino acids. And that's what we should be using. Now, why has that been slow to change? Well, the reason that is what calibration are we going to settle on with the NIR to look at these digestible amino acids? There's probably two that are the best ones, and one would be the one that Adjunct has developed. And Adjunct is a company that makes synthetic amino acids like methionine. The other one is Evonik, and both of these companies have developed NIR calibrations to estimate the digestible amino acid level. Now, most larger companies have access to those calibrations and have the NIR machine, so they can do that. And I guess some of the smaller companies may not. They may have to pay a lab that has a machine like that to get the answer. But similarly, they would have to pay to have the nitrogen content or crude protein analyzed. So that's what we're here to tell people about, and to try, to convince them that it's the digestible amino acids that are important, and the crude protein really doesn't matter.
And if I could jump in real quick, I think this is Seth again, and I think one of the issues why this hangs on is that Bob mentioned that protein is easy to measure, but the system is also built largely around buyers as purchasing agents within companies that are sourcing soybean meal that act somewhat independently from the actual nutritionists. And so, kind of the status quo of the industry tends to be that buyers purchase the meal at the lowest relative price. They buy meal that fits within a broad specification provided by the nutritionist, but then the nutritionist's job is really to deal with that meal once they get to once it's purchased and on site. And so what we're trying to encourage is that buyers work with their nutritionists up front and maybe be more strategic in how they purchase their meal, that might help reduce or increase the efficiency of their overall operation and increase rates of gain and those kind of things for their operations.
And I might add what might affect the digestibility of these amino acids. And you have a few things. One would be storage conditions of the beans before they make the meal. Obviously, storage conditions of the meal after it's been produced. And then how the heat is applied at the crushing factory. And so if there's too much heat applied or for too long of a period of time, there's a few of these amino acids are very sensitive to denaturation from heat. And some of those would be the important one, lysine. Another one, cysteine, that's very sensitive to heat, and also threonine. So those would be the ones, and those make up some of this critical amino acid value. Anyway, the digestibility of those is impacted more greatly than some of the other amino acids during processing. So, and that's going to make all the difference in the world to how the chickens perform or how the pigs perform.
Yeah. Finally, both you and Seth, Bob, have been traveling extensively around Southeast Asia, so you have field experience as to what people actually think. So I just want to know, Asia is a price-sensitive market, and however much you talk about the crude protein value, critical amino acid values, they go on price. And this is something the US has been struggling to compete with countries like Brazil. So how do you take all this, complex scientific information and convince the purchasing officers to actually choose the more nutritious soybean?
Yes, that's always the price is always the bottom line, isn't it? And the other bit of news that's happening in the US now is that there's more crushing capacity being built. And with that, the price of the US meal should become a bit more competitive in the future.
Yeah, and I would just say, relative to the education piece, is that this is an ongoing proposition, and we're really trying to change some habits and how business has been done historically. And so we're not after a hard sell where we're making huge claims and suggesting people that alter their operations immediately and directly and make drastic changes, but we're trying to educate them about the value proposition between what they're purchasing and the actual value of that product for them, their customers or their animals, and how that might affect their overall operation. So we know that these differences may be very small, but we also know that those very small differences might be enough to make the margin to be positive or negative in some of these very, very tough markets. So it may be only a few cents per bird that it might affect, but we want to provide the information and help them to make changes on their own gradually over time. And I would just add really quickly, and I know we're out of time here, but the one of the increased production of meal from the U.S. is largely a significant portion of this is going to come from the region that we're discussing today. Mm-hmm. So that's an important factor to communicate with the buyers as well.
Thank you so much, Seth and Bob, for joining us in this podcast. I'm sure this would be very illuminating for our listeners.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you gain some important insight from it. Please subscribe to the Asian Agribiz channel on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcast on. For more information, please visit www.asian-agribiz.com.